Brad Mitchell thought he knew exactly what he saw. A poor black kid touching something he shouldn't. Within 4 seconds, he'd made his decision. Within 30 seconds, he'd created the worst moment of his career. Within 3 minutes, his face would be on 500 phone screens, his actions judged by the entire mall, his reputation crumbling like sheet music thrown into fire. By minute 5, he'd be standing frozen while a world-famous pianist told him exactly what he'd just destroyed. But to understand why one security guard, as prejudice, became an international news story, we have to go back 8 minutes to when Elijah Washington was just a boy who wanted to touch real ivory keys for the first time in his life. The Grand Pavilion Mall in Seattle was built to make people feel rich, even if they were just window shopping. Golden afternoon sunlight poured through the massive glass ceiling 3 stories above, turning the marble floor into a mirror that reflected designer brand names back at themselves. The air smelled like expensive perfume samples and fresh espresso from the Italian cafe on the 2nd level. In the center of it all sat the piano, a 9-foot Steinway grand, black as midnight, polished until it gleamed. The mall had placed it there 6 months ago as an art installation. Anyone could play it, the sign said. But in reality, only certain people did. Well-dressed adults performing soft jazz, occasionally a teenager with obvious classical training, always people who looked like they belonged in a place where handbags cost $3,000. Elijah Washington stood 20 feet away, hidden behind a large white planter box, just staring. He'd been staring for 11 minutes. His grandmother was on the 3rd floor at the discount department store, the only place in this mall where their budget made sense. She'd told him to wait by the fountain, but he'd heard the music and followed it like a magnet. He'd never touched a real piano before, never even been close to one. His entire musical education came from a 5-year-old iPhone with a cracked screen. Watching YouTube tutorials on a paper keyboard, he'd drawn himself with marker on cardboard. Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin. He'd memorized dozens of pieces, his fingers moving on paper keys while imagining the sound in his head. The piano sat empty now. The last player, a middle-aged woman in a business suit, had finished a rendition of Autumn Leaves and walked away 5 minutes ago. Nobody was around it. Nobody was playing it. The sign said anyone could play. Elijah made his decision. His heart hammered as he approached, his worn sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished marble. He looked around, saw mostly disinterested shoppers carrying bags, no one paying attention. He ducked under the velvet rope, climbed onto the bench, and for the first time in his 8 years of life, placed his small fingers on real piano keys. The sound that came out wasn't what anyone expected. Elijah's fingers found the opening notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, and suddenly the mall's expensive acoustics came alive. The first movement, Adagio sostenuto, poured from the Steinway like liquid moonlight turned into sound. His small hands moved with the precision of someone who'd practiced 1,000 times, even if those practices had been on paper. Shoppers began stopping, turning, walking toward the sound. Within 30 seconds, a small crowd had formed. Phones came out. Someone whispered, "Is that a child?" Another voice, "He's incredible." A woman pulled out her phone and started recording. Elijah didn't notice any of them. His eyes were closed. For the first time, he wasn't imagining the music. He was making it. Real sound, real vibrations. His fingers dancing on ivory instead of cardboard. Tears ran down his cheeks without him realizing it. This was the most beautiful moment of his entire life. Brad Mitchell saw something completely different. He saw a kid in a torn hoodie, jeans that didn't fit right, sneakers that looked like they'd been pulled from a donation bin. He saw someone who clearly didn't belong in this mall touching a $100,000 piano without permission. He saw a liability, a problem, something that needed to be removed before real customers complained. Brad moved fast, his boots loud on the marble, his hand already reaching for his radio to call backup. He didn't hear the music, didn't hear the gasps from the crowd, didn't see the phone's recording. He saw only what his prejudice allowed him to see. He reached Elijah in 6 seconds, grabbed the boy's shoulder with enough force to yank him backward off the bench, and shouted for everyone to hear, "Get off that piano! You're not allowed to touch that." The music stopped. The crowd gasped. Elijah's eyes opened wide with shock and fear. His hands, which seconds ago had been creating beauty, now clutched at the bench to stop himself from falling. What Brad didn't see was the elegant woman in the gray cashmere coat who'd been standing at the edge of the crowd for the past minute. The woman whose face had gone from curiosity to wonder to absolute shock as she listened to Elijah play. The woman who now stepped forward with the quiet authority of someone who performed in Carnegie Hall 17 times. Brad pulled Elijah completely away from the piano, the boy's sneakers scuffing on the marble as he stumbled. The security guard held him by the shoulder, fingers digging in hard enough to hurt, addressing the crowd like he was protecting them from danger. He announced that the piano was for mall guests only, that unsupervised children couldn't just come in and touch expensive equipment, that he'd be calling the police if the boy's guardian didn't come forward immediately. Elijah tried to speak, his voice small and shaking. He tried to explain that the sign said anyone could play, that he just wanted to try real keys, that he was sorry if he'd done something wrong. But Brad cut him off, talking over him, telling him that kids like him needed to learn respect for other people's property. The crowd had grown to nearly 100 people. Every single one of them was recording now. The musical moment had transformed into something else, a viral video in the making, but not the kind Brad thought. An older man in an expensive suit shouted, "Let the kid play. He was incredible." A teenage girl yelled, "This is racist." Others joined in, their voices rising. But Brad doubled down, his face reddening, insisting he was just doing his job, that there were rules for a reason. Elijah's eyes filled with tears. Not the tears of musical joy from 2 minutes ago, but tears of shame and confusion. He'd done something beautiful, and somehow it had become something bad. His backpack slipped off his shoulder and hit the floor. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind. "Some places aren't for people like us, baby. If this injustice makes your blood boil, please like and subscribe. Because what happens in the next 60 seconds will restore your faith that talent always finds its voice." The voice that cut through the chaos was quiet, but it carried, cultured, calm, absolutely certain. "Excuse me. I need you to release that child immediately." Brad turned, ready to assert his authority over another interfering customer. His prepared speech died on his lips. Yuki Tanaka stood 3 feet away, her elegant glasses catching the light, her expression a mixture of disappointment and controlled fury that only a master teacher could achieve. She held her phone up, showing Brad his own face from 30 seconds ago, the video playing on loop, him grabbing a child, shouting while the boy tried to explain. She identified herself calmly, her name, her credentials. Juilliard Professor Emerita, guest conductor for the Seattle Symphony. 3 Grammy nominations. She'd been shopping 2 floors up when she heard the Beethoven and came down to find its source. The crowd recognized her name. Gasps rippled through the gathering. The teenage girl who'd yelled earlier whispered, "Oh my God, that's Yuki Tanaka." Someone else pulled up her Wikipedia page and started reading it aloud. Brad's face went from red to white. His hand released Elijah's shoulder like it had been burned. He tried to stammer an explanation, but Yuki held up one finger, a gesture that silenced him as effectively as a conductor stopping an orchestra. She asked Brad a simple question. "Did you listen to him play before you decided he didn't belong here?" Brad's silence was answer enough. Yuki turned to Elijah, knelt down to his eye level, despite her expensive coat and the marble floor. She asked him gently where he'd learned to play like that. Elijah, still crying, explained about the paper keyboard, the YouTube videos, the practice on cardboard. Yuki's eyes filled with tears. She looked back at Brad, and spoke words that would be replayed millions of times. This child has more musical talent in his smallest finger than most people I've taught in 40 years. And you treated him like a criminal for the crime of being poor. Yuki stood, helped Elijah to his feet, and walked him back to the piano. The crowd parted like water. She invited him to sit, adjusted the bench height for him, and asked if he'd finished the piece. Elijah looked at Brad, fear still in his eyes. Yuki followed his gaze, then addressed the security guard with the kind of quiet authority that ends careers. She informed him that she was personal friends with the mall's owner, that she had video evidence of excessive force against the minor, that she was fairly certain the mall's anyone can play policy did not include age or appearance restrictions, that if he had any intention of keeping his job, he would stand quietly and listen to what real talent sounded like. Brad stood frozen, his face a mask of regret and terror. Around him, hundreds of phones recorded his humiliation. His radio crackled with his supervisor's voice, demanding to know what was happening. But he couldn't move, couldn't speak, could only watch as his prejudice were played on 500 screens. Elijah's fingers found the keys again. He picked up exactly where Brad had interrupted him. The Moonlight Sonata's first movement flowing again, like Brad's interruption, had been just a rest in the music. But this time, Elijah played with his eyes open, watching Yuki watch him, seeing her tears of recognition, understanding for the first time that he wasn't just good at pressing keys on paper. He was a pianist. When the piece ended, the mall erupted in applause that echoed off the glass ceiling. Yuki embraced Elijah like he was her own grandchild. She asked for his grandmother's contact information, then and there. Full scholarship to her summer intensive program. Private lessons. Introduction to the director at Cornish College. Everything that talent like his deserved, but circumstances had denied. Brad Mitchell quietly removed his own security badge and set it on a nearby bench. He didn't wait to be fired. He simply left, walking through a crowd that parted in silence, everyone's eyes following the man who almost destroyed a miracle because he couldn't see past a torn hoodie. 6 months later, Elijah Washington performed at Benaroya Hall with the Seattle Symphony's youth program. He wore a suit that fit, shoes without duct tape, and played the same Moonlight Sonata that had been interrupted in the mall. His grandmother sat in the front row, crying. Yuki Tanaka conducted. The video of his mall encounter had gotten 47 million views. But that wasn't the miracle. The miracle was that someone heard the music before they saw the clothes. That someone refused to let talent be silenced by prejudice. That someone remembered what music is supposed to do, reveal the soul hiding beneath whatever surface the world sees first. Brad Mitchell's story ended differently. He wasn't fired, he resigned. Last anyone heard, he was working a different job, telling people that he learned the hardest lesson of his life the day he grabbed a child and stopped a miracle. The question isn't whether we judge people by appearance. We do. The question is, when we're proven wrong, do we double down or do we change? When you see someone who doesn't look like they belong, do you stop them or do you stop and listen? What would you have done?